All right. So, hey, everyone, welcome to the show. I'm here with Magdalena. And boy, we've been chatting online back and forth from time to time and never really had the opportunity to sit down and have this more in-depth conversation. So I'm really looking forward to going through this. So my first question for you is, how did you become a Bitcoiner? How did you get into this space? Tell us your story and welcome to the show.
So my story is common to, I think, many people, which is number go up. So, picture this, 27. I mean, I've heard about Bitcoin, and I remember even like searching for Bitcoin in my emails and coming across it around like 2013, but it was really number go up technology where I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I need to buy some because it's going up. And so maybe it's not as an exciting story. But it was also quite the learning opportunity because I lost money in Quadriga. So that's, trial by fire. You learn that way. I lost money through, when you first get into the space, everything's shiny and sexy and interesting. And you're like, wow, these ICOs, they're really pumping. And one of those people that, despite coming in at 2017, I lost a lot of money because I was not... Yes, I made some mistakes, but again, trial by fire, and that's how a lot of Bitcoiners become Bitcoiners, right? And how a lot of Bitcoiners custody their own Bitcoin because they do these missteps. And I think trial by fire is probably the best way to learn because people don't listen. They think I'm gonna make a ton of money, $1 million on this NFT, when most cases people don't. So the best way to learn is touching that hot stove.
So you were a Supreme Court appointed bankruptcy inspector, and you were overseeing the bank trustee for 76,000 victims on the Quadriga digital currency exchange collapse. At the time, this was a $215 million exchange collapse. And so I guess my first question for you is, walk us through this experience. Talk to us about what it was like, and talk to us about the whole exchange collapse. Give us all the details and really don't hold back, because I'm just curious what this was like to go through.
So I think, first of all, it was a huge shock to see such a loss. 215 million in Canada is, in this kind of time where we're post Mt. Gox, where it's 2018, the end of 2018, seeing something of this scale. I don't think people were expecting it because, we're kind of transitioning away from this Wild West. And it really was, as more details came to light, it's the perfect case study of everything that can go wrong in an exchange. And I personally lost money. That's how I came to be in this role. You have to be a creditor to be able to represent other creditors as a bankruptcy trustee. And I also sit on the board of on a committee that makes decisions on behalf of creditors, because it's kind of like a class action lawsuit. So we inform kind of decision making. And, what was really kind of depressing to everybody was how little assets were recovered. It was only about 46 million of the 215 million. And just to put a scale on that, currently it's worth about 1.4 billion. So it was a lot. And the wild part is everything that happened, that went down. There was an OSC report kind of post-mortem, which actually called Quadriga a Ponzi. And, it really went to show this is pretty much everything that can go wrong. So the CEO had a criminal past. He was, engaged in Ponzi schemes way back when he was, I think, when he was 16 years old, and he was involved with another bad actor who had his co-founder was helping him with kind of these schemes, and that's how they met, on these forums on how to scam people, which is interesting because we just had a recent resurgence where Michael Patron, so the co-founder, was managing $1 billion DeFi treasury for Wonderland. So it's wild kind of that this still continues, and now it's 2022. But anyways, so, typically in regular markets, there are measures in place to prevent something like a criminal running a financial institution. So what was really crazy there was Quadriga really misrepresented their custody practices. So the assets were not safeguarded in cold storage, like they said. What the CEO Cotton actually did was he created and then he traded fake assets against clients using aliases. So some of them were like CP30, just like making little puns. And then he sent client coins to other exchanges and he was a bad trader, like terrible. So the exchange, him trading, incurred about 143 million trading shortfall. And so he kept then using client assets to cover the shortfall, which would then escalate the losses. And then with his death, it really kind of kicked off that collapse of the exchange because people started looking into what happened. But it was kind of more than that. And he didn't just do this. He also embezzled exchange funds. He bought homes, multiple homes, cars, a boat, a plane, luxury vacations, right? And his activities on the exchange were deliberately not tracked in the system. Like he had blanked, everybody else, you could see what happened in kind of the history, but he blanked it. Quadriga didn't have a business continuity plan. So after he died, the directors that took over were unable to regain Quadriga's wallets or his accounts. And he did all his trading and running the exchange on a laptop. So they couldn't access any of his devices. So they actually thought that, hey, maybe we can get some of the assets at some point if we manage to get into them. But no, actually the wallets were empty. They didn't have any financial books and records. They failed to file corporate taxes. And then so that also led to this tax liability, which is right now the reason why we're delayed in a claims distribution is because the CRA, IRS equivalent in Canada is needs to file, their claim. And also, the exchange, because in Canada, Bitcoin crypto companies have had such a problem getting banking and access to banking, or they got, banks de-risk. So he was using third-party payment processors. And then these were, at least, one of these was commingling personal and client funds. And so the only reason we recovered $30 million was because the funds were frozen by CIBC. And, because the bank was looking into this. So that actually saved creditors because there was some money recovered beyond the homes. And then, they did not have very good operational kind of practices. They lost 67,000 ETH, which is a lot right now, due to a coding error. I believe it was the parity bug. So, Kraken, I know, lost some money too, but it's inaccessible right now. So those are kind of, at a high level, everything that typically, the current financial industry does to kind of prevent against these things. They did wrong.
This was huge, especially at that point in time for an exchange to have 215 million back in 2018. This was a really big deal. And I would imagine this was one of the larger exchanges in Canada. Definitely not the biggest.
It was the largest.
Was it really the largest? It
was the largest, but here's the interesting part. So it kind of got that way through fraud because he created all these fake accounts. He was trading with himself and other users. So especially right at the beginning, like when it first started, something like 80 or 90% of trades were his. So he gave this illusion of liquidity. And when people go to exchanges, right, they're like, hey, there's a lot of volume being traded here. It must be a safer exchange. He also said that he was registered with FinTrack, which oversees money service businesses. And it's not like you register and they check in. It's a good practice thing. It's not like the government, gave a stamp of approval, but people thought it was good, it was like, oh, it's a sign that they're on the up and up. So, there was a lot of fraud that happened, whether it was, kind of to create this idea that this was a good exchange or actual fraud, where he was trading against users and stealing their money.
So for a person listening to this, they're thinking to themselves, my God, that sounds scary as hell. And especially for people that are maybe new to Bitcoin, hearing this, they're saying, what the heck? What would be your takeaway, having lived through this horrific experience, which I don't think is the norm for most market participants in this space? What would be your takeaway for a person who's hearing this? What do you say?
I think it fundamentally comes down to, keep what you're comfortable losing on an exchange. And just don't keep the majority of your funds on an exchange, because things can happen. Now, some of the larger ones we have seen, if there is some sort of hack, they, cover it with their own cash. But if it's significant enough vulnerability, you're not guaranteed to get anything back. And I know it's hard. So I want to be realistic. People engage in trades. They set up, trades that, for a certain limit price, right, to hit. And so it's a matter of really finding out what you're comfortable with and, figuring out how to de-risk. So maybe it's finding 2 or 3 exchanges that are more reputable, they're following regulations, there's nothing shady happening, and, spreading it out if you want, so if one goes down, maybe, you don't lose everything if you are a trader. But it really, and a lot of people too, they get comfortable, they put some money on an exchange, maybe it's $1,000, but, or $5,000. But think about when Bitcoin was 4,000 and then it shot up, 40, 60,000 within 1 year. You can 10x easily what you have on there and forget. I mean,
Well, and I think another key point that I'm just thinking of is just like the guy in charge. So much flows from the top down with the leadership of any organization. I don't care what it is. Like this past week, we saw Jesse Powell out of Kraken make his statement to the world of, hey, yeah, if a government comes to me and tells me that I've got to seize up funds, I have to do these things in order to obey these laws without being shut down. So get your coins off the exchange.
Yeah.
Was literally coming from the top CEO of one of the biggest exchanges on the planet. This guy doesn't sound like he would ever say something of such ethical transparency, right? So I do your homework on who's ever in charge of some of these organizations.
Yeah, and that one is actually interesting. So sort of after what happened in Canada over the last week, it's not just, losses, exchange losses or a hack that you have to worry about. It's, are you going to be financially censored for some reason, maybe even without due process, like in Canada, and your funds cut off or your address is flagged? So if there is a third-party custodian that's subject to certain rules and they want to, stay on the good books of the government that they want to, continue operating in that country, you might get your assets frozen as well. So that's something to consider. Whenever there's a third party, you're not the one in control of your money. And, so if you take money off the exchange, you control it, but then it's a different issue where you are responsible for your own money. So it's like, if you have a gold bar, where do you store it? Do you bury it somewhere and then forget, right? there's other factors that come into play, and it's trade-offs, but you have to kind of think about that for yourself. What trade-off is more important to me? For example, for me, just like a personal story. So what I saw asset seizure through my grandma. So after the war in Poland, the borders were shifted, and she had this family farm, beautiful, she should call it paradise, right? Beautiful gardens. It was just so bountiful. The earth, like the vegetables, she'd be like, oh yeah, it was like a shield, it was that size, the sunflowers. And so when the border shifted, that was no longer hers. So she lost that asset. And that's something that, she really missed. And so I saw that for my family. And so that's important to me, is like, I want to have some assets that I know nobody can take from me. And so that's how I view the world. And then you yourself have to kind of picture what's important to you. And, are you responsible enough to kind of take that financial sovereignty?
All right. So let's talk about another thing that you were a part of here. So you helped with the 3IQ IPO, which was North America's first regulated Bitcoin fund on the TSX. Walk us through what this process was like. You have tons of people here in the US wondering why in the world we don't have a spot ETF. But walk us through this process, and then just kind of give us some of your thoughts on what it's like to kind of get something like this pushed through, and then maybe some of your thoughts on the spot ETF stuff.
So 3IQ's Bitcoin fund really paved the way for all funds, including ETFs in Canada. And that's kind of an interesting story too, because 3AQ took on the regulator, so the Ontario Securities Commission, which, so just to set the scene, in Canada, we have provincial regulators. We don't have one Securities Commission. Every province has one, but the Ontario Securities Commission is the one that other provinces look to, just kind of like the world looks at what the SEC does. And so, and they also kind of throw their weight around too, around the other jurisdictions. And so they thought, that a Bitcoin fund was not in the best interest of retail consumers. And so what, 3AQ thought initially would be pretty easy to get was it ended up being a 3-year legal battle to get, to make it okay. And so, very similar to what's happening now, where it'll be interesting. I believe that there is, sorry, are they taking, is Grayscale going to court, or?
It sure looks like they're ramping up to do something in the legal domain. Yeah.
So they might actually have kind of like a 3AQ journey where at the end of it, there were multiple hearings, and the judge, so one of the commissioners, came out with a 26-page ruling about why there should be a Bitcoin fund in Canada and how it is in the best interest of retail consumers. And that, that piece of paper, that document, is the foundation that all other funds went to apply for their prospectuses for. So, but it was really interesting because you really had to push back. So they basically had the OSC say no, so that they could then take them to court and then fight for a ruling that would permit that. So it's a different type of, approach rather than, asking, because then you get a concrete answer. And I think it's really interesting because Canada and the US are very similar in terms of markets and just, Western type of country. So maybe if some smaller country like Bermuda launches a Bitcoin fund, it's not the same kind of implication, but you have funds and ETFs in Europe, Singapore, in Canada, and I'm really looking at the US, like the precedent has been set for these types of products. And I really question why the US does not have one, especially looking at, what's happening with Grayscale and the heavy discount, with the futures product, the carrying fees. It doesn't seem like in the best interest of retail
at all. I mean, it's just, it is so administratively burdensome when you're looking at the futures, try to synthetically create a price around these futures that are constantly being changed. And I mean, it's very frustrating, and it really makes you think, is he doing something in order to allow all of his Wall Street connections to get in there? And I hate to sound like a tinfoil hat type person, but I can't figure out any other reason why somebody would be pushing back this hard. And I mean, the thing that I find really strange about it is Hester Pierce, who's the deputy there, has the exact opposite opinion of him. I don't know if it's a good cop, bad cop routine that they're playing, or if it's like they just really don't get along. Well,
what's interesting too. So, I worked in economic development type of activities on the policy side for government for a decade. And if it wasn't a country like the US, I would say you're shooting yourself in the foot from an economic perspective. Unfortunately, the US has a significant moat in that everybody looks at the financial markets in the US, right? They are the biggest. So if you want to list something, you go there, right? If you're a Bitcoin miner, you don't list on the Canadian exchange, you want to list on the US exchange because of all the benefits that accrued with that. But otherwise, I'm thinking just like in terms of investment and jobs that you're costing, if it were any other country, because you want to provide your citizens this opportunity, you want this industry to thrive and have, the economic benefits and innovation that comes from it. So it's just, I really question what is happening there and what they think, because typically, government has trade-offs. They think this outweighs that, so therefore we're saying no because these other reasons are making it more important. They're saying it's, not in the interest of retail, similar kind of type of story, or there's market manipulation, et cetera, for other reasons why they say no. But like, what is it that they think they see is the part that I question.
All right, so let's talk the Citadel 256 Bitcoin mining. Explain to folks what it is, kind of help us understand what your role is there and how long you've been a part of it.
Yeah, so Citadel 256, I launched with the co-founders of HUD 8, so Mark and Sean, and post HUD 8, this was unrelated to HUD 8, and we were looking to build enterprise scale hosting for Bitcoin miners. And what's interesting is we actually started working on that and talking to Asian miners because of the connections that we had before the China ban. So what it really was kind of this testament to the onshoring of the mining industry back to North America. So, it's bringing manufacturing back because of the opportunities that North America has, whether that's, a competitive energy system or opportunities that for low cost prices. For example, we were looking at a site where it was co-located with a wind farm. So we would get reduced pricing for the time that the wind was blowing. So about 80% of a 100 megawatt site coming from renewables, and then the rest from the Texas grid. So I think, having worked in an environment, having worked for a decade with heavy industry around competitiveness issues, I'm very familiar with, kind of the investment decisions that are, I'm familiar with the investment decisions that a heavy industrial undertakes, especially one that is energy intense and trade exposed. And there's no other industry that is as energy intense and trade exposed as miners. And what I mean by trade exposed is if policies change, for example, China banning Bitcoin, will the industry just get up and go? And mining is pretty unique because you can move the miners. They're the biggest cost in terms of infrastructure. So you can ship them and rebuild. Unlike something like a steel plant where you have a coke oven that's maybe $30 million, $40 million and has a lifetime of 30-ish years. So it's a unique industry because you can move to energy sources that are cheap, that are even low, no cost or negative cost, as in you're getting paid to take that feedstock. And what I mean by get paid to take in is waste. People pay tipping fees to remove waste. So as a miner, if you have an operation, you can lower your costs that way, or you can co-locate next to a heat load. So you can sell the heat offtake, as in miners generate a lot of heat, that can then be piped over to a heat load. So that can be something like space heating for a city, which is happening in Vancouver right now in a pilot, or a greenhouse, or a farm, warm up your hogs in the winter. So I think mining is pretty interesting, and how it manages to kind of infiltrate all these different types or parts of the economy.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that you could have, a $10,000 miner is not really all that big for removing and sending it to some other jurisdiction that happens to be much more favorable to the policies of doing it. So if you take 100 of these things, that's $1 million worth of infrastructure, and it's really not taking up a whole lot of space. In fact, that's why I think you see a lot of them putting them just straight into containers, so that you can just modularize the container and send it somewhere else if the policies start to become more disadvantageous to the people conducting the mining. And just
on that thought, that's why it's easy in some ways to attract miners, because if you create the right economic incentive in your jurisdiction, the miners can very easily pick up and go, because again, the most expensive part is
the rig.
The capital part is the miner, and if the energy economics are much more competitive, they'll move over there, right? And look at what's happening in Texas. It's becoming a mecca. And there's jobs that are being created. And what's really fascinating, and kind of the coolest part of Bitcoin mining is it straddles the digital and physical world. So it has a physical footprint just like any traditional industry, but it creates a product that's fully digital, and it's a commodity. And so typically, commodities, they have super low margins, but the margins on mining, have been reaching 80-90%.
Really high.
Like
Yeah.
it's wild. And you cannot, like, if the price goes up, you can't produce more Bitcoin. Like, there is a mathematical equation that says how many Bitcoin are always produced. So it's not like gold, where if gold were to 5x, suddenly you'd have a ton more mines, increasing production. So I think it's such a unique industry, and because of that, there's unique features that come with it. And then also from that economic development perspective, why it's attractive for countries or states or even cities to attract it is because you're creating these knowledge economy jobs that come with mining. So it's all the financialization of Bitcoin mining, right? There's the energy side and energy experts, plus the actual builders, those who set up the mine, who build the infrastructure and manage it. It's just, and now we're integrating with with other industries, like whether that's district heating or waste management. So it's just fascinating seeing kind of this diversification and opportunity in so many sectors of the economy.
So what do you think? What do you think most people miss about the whole mining process? If you're just going to think, the typical person that knows quite a bit about Bitcoin, what is it that they miss when it comes to mining?
I think it comes down to sort of this misconception that Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment because it's using power. For what? And there's kind of a number of different ways where they're wrong. One is, they think that one Bitcoin transaction is the equivalent to a block reward, which you're probably familiar with. Another one is that there's all this energy that could be used for better things. Maybe it's like hospitals or something, but they don't understand how much energy is either misallocated or wasted. If we just look at some of the cool business models that these miners are finding, flare gas in the oil and gas industry. Typically, oil and gas flares. So they emit methane from the oil and gas process, and because methane is 25 times more potent than CO2, or 80 times if over a longer lifetime. And so because you're converting methane into CO2, it's an environmental benefit. And so, but it's still energy that's being wasted. So the awesome part is, miners come in, they're a more efficient process. They're taking this wasted energy and they're, putting it to good use for, to support the Bitcoin network. In the case of, so recently, we're hearing a lot about miners destroying the planet, not just because they're boiling the ocean and wasting energy, but there's a lot of e-waste out there. They're generating waste, filling landfills. And I think this is an opportunity to kind of like flip the narrative, because there are miners that are taking advantage of waste resources, whether that is municipal solid waste or the billions of waste tires generated annually across the globe. And so that is a resource that could be mined for energy that's just sitting in a landfill, and it's a negative cost energy. And so we're seeing miners kind of fill that niche and figure out, better uses. The waste heat that is created from a miner is a resource as well, right? Whether you're heating buildings or heating greenhouses, and this is both things that are happening right now, or another kind of low grade heat process in manufacturing, there's opportunities to kind of reuse that waste resource. And so, I think there's an elegance to Bitcoin where it moves based on economic incentives, right? And it's simple, right? It's just a simple set of economic incentives. And so for the first time, we have this way where we can fund public policy issues that, typically have had under investments, whether that's, the transition to a low carbon economy where trillions of dollars are needed to get us there, or, this transition to kind of like a more modern, clean, resilient energy system, because of a lot of our infrastructure in North America has been underinvested and we get brownouts. Transmission, distribution lines, generation, some of these plants are over 100 years old. And so there is investment that's needed. And I think, traditionally it's been the government. So either it's the users, so the ratepayers, or it's the taxpayers, or it's the private sector that steps in because of some, capitalistic opportunity. But we now have this new bucket that can fund sort of these public policy issues that could generate some sort of positive environmental outcome or societal outcome. So, whether it's waste reduction, whether it's resource optimization or optimization of the grid, as is happening in Texas. And so having worked for a decade in the low carbon economic transition, I keep seeing the goalposts get moved. And it's typical because, governments want to get reelected, so they don't want to come down too hard with the stick, right? And this is kind of a different way out, and it's purely being done based on economic incentives. These miners are saying, hey, here's a resource that I can lower my cost with, or I can sell this heat offtake, and it's a additional revenue stream for me. And that is creating this environmental benefit. So I think that is a piece that people aren't yet capturing, and sort of the synergies that we're seeing, between miners and the renewable energy industry that hasn't yet come to light because everyone's so focused about, boiling the oceans. And so I think it's one of those things, the Satoshi quote, I don't have time. If you don't believe it or don't get it, I don't have the time to convince you, I'm sorry. It's kind of like, at some point, like, this is already happening, right? They're combining with legacy industry, integrating and finding these synergies. And at some point, people are going to realize, hey, this actually happened, right? So we don't need to, people will believe because they'll eventually see it. It'll be so commonplace. Like, even think about in people's homes. People are sticking miners in. They're reducing their home heating bills, which are traditionally carbon sources because it's natural gas, and they're heating their home on grid power. And depending on where you live, you might actually be, 98% renewable, like in BC where it's all hydro. So I think it's fascinating how this industry is just so pervasive in terms of the economic sectors that it can positively impact, and people tend to focus a lot on the negatives, right? So, the financial services, there's all these societal benefits that can accrue from access, but then people tend to focus on the negatives. So they focus on, the criminals and the money laundering, right? There's the energy system where people tend to focus on this, they're wasting very good energy. Well, it's not the case, right? We're creating a better, more resilient, more optimized grid system. Manufacturing, creating additional revenue streams, and maybe actually helping struggling legacy industries. Like, if you look at the pulp and paper sector, they've been dying. We're all going digital, right? And they require heat. Well, heat recovery is a cross-cutting technology. So I am seeing miners partner with pulp and paper sector. So if you can provide a little bit of an extra revenue stream, or even miners co-locating at a legacy business and providing that revenue stream, like in the oil and gas sector, there's a lot of opportunities there. And actually so a country that kind of cuts off Bitcoin, whether it's Bitcoin mining or just Bitcoin, is kind of shooting itself in the foot, because this is an industry that lives in both the digital and the physical world. And it's not just about mining. Like, even think about, custodial wallets. Like, it's industry. It's a different type of industry, and we're still manufacturing things. They're just things that kind of straddle this digital and physical world. So I think that's kind of why it's fascinating, but that's, policy people are kind of still missing, the forest for the trees. And we're seeing a lot, there's the left and the right, or the conservatives versus the liberals. And, the conservatives are very much, it's all about the capitalist system, which is, mining fundamentally comes down to the economics, right? There's nothing more capitalistic about that. But then, there's all these positive benefits that can accrue societally, including something as simple as food security. If you look at Alaska or Northern Canada, there are places where, they don't have access to fresh fruits and veggies. But if you put in a mining operation, and I know there's for some First Nations that are looking into this, you put in a mining operation and you're essentially subsidizing fresh food production, instead of having it shipped in. So there's these little policy levers that aren't, a mandate, like a government mandate, thou shalt do this, or thou shalt not pollute, that type of thing, where it's actually positively incentivized. And that's why I think it's a fascinating place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And it when I'm listening to what you're talking about, and you really are hitting at economic incentives, I think so many elected officials are thinking they look at policy as their tool or their way of displaying, hey, I came up with this policy, which then attracted whatever to come into this jurisdiction, which was a win for my, me being in charge or in this domain. And I think that with this in particular, you really, less is more. Not putting something in place is allowing these economic incentives to naturally express themselves and to attract all of these things to happening. Like you were talking about the gas flaring and just, you name it. Everyone wants to try to optimize this heat energy that's naturally being kicked off from the act of mining. And they're naturally trying to find the cheapest kind of energy or creating some type of business to go upstream. And like you and I had talked before we started recording about Jason Williams with the tires, right? Like here's a guy who's getting paid to take the tires.
Yeah.
Getting paid to take the tires and then converting that into energy to then, run mining rigs. But
then also creating value-added products, because there's black carbon that's generated, there's oil, there's the synthetic gas, right? There's steel that can be recycled. So it's not just like thermally, it's the thermal deconstruction of the product. You're not just burning the tire, you're creating resources that typically, to produce oil or to produce the black carbon, you would have your own industrial process with its own environmental impact. So you're replacing that. So I think, these types of stories need to be told more to the policymakers, and just from my experience working with industry, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We haven't been squeaking enough as an industry, I think, but it really is changing. We're at a point where the industry is so financialized, and they've got capital. Because there are so many publicly listed companies, whether that's miners, but then also, you have exchanges have tremendous amount of capital that can start to throw their weight around like traditional industry has. And we are seeing that. And I think it's something that's going to grow. And it's been interesting because I'm not surprised to see, mining as an industry create its own group. And that's what happens in legacy industry. You have Canadian manufacturers and exporters, but then you have the steel association, the cement association, where everybody has their own special, unique issues that they bring forward, and they build those relationships with policymakers, and they tell the story of, we employ X amount of people, we generate, we bring this much to the economy, and that's kind of why it's important. But I think it's more difficult to understand, because steel is something simple in the sense that this is an industry, and we create steel. And but then Bitcoin, because so I'm going to bring in the Darwin Finches. So just taking a look at mining on its own, there's this Cambrian explosion of these niches, ecological niches where miners sit in across various sectors of the economy, like waste management, agriculture, energy, just all these places. And then that's just mining alone. And then you get into wallets and exchanges. It's become so complex that just the energy story is this big black box typically for people. But now you pile in, what do you mean? You're replacing our money. People can't grasp all these concepts. So it's really hard for them, to build policy, because for the big picture, I think it's important, you want to support the whole Bitcoin ecosystem, because then you're creating economies of scale, you're creating this economic global hub, and then you're strengthening this attraction of talent and money in this kind of virtuous cycle. So I think fundamentally, I think where we really need to go is it's of strategic importance to develop a domestic Bitcoin strategy, but it's so complex in how it plays out. But the policymakers need this big view, because there's just so many levers that you can apply to then support a domestic Bitcoin strategy. And I think, if you're just looking at mining and energy alone, you might be missing some of the other policy impacts, like that recent bill that have been put forward, the one which would affect miners and nodes, make them kind of essentially money service transmitters. Like, that was something that had kind of unintended consequences. It was part of the Infrastructure Act, which kind of ironically was going to kill the, new digital infrastructure in the way that it was being built. But so the whole part is, you have to have this view. It's a domestic Bitcoin strategy, where the best types of strategies, if you're looking at kind of an industry or a sector, are those that, are very broad. So they look at different policy levers, and not all levers are fiscal. They're things like, yes, so maybe they're fiscal, like funding and creating loans and infrastructure spending, but instead of building roads, we're building, Bitcoin infrastructure, payment rails. But it's things like, government as a first customer, because this company is new, it's a startup and it's never had a first customer. But typically how that works is, before I become a customer, I want to know who your customer was. Oh, it's the government, it's the US government. Of course, we'll take you on, because they must have vetted you, right? And it's things, not necessarily directly spending, where it's like, we provide you with funding for research, for example. It's, you can do things like tax credits or rebates. But then, the big part, and I think that a lot of governments are maybe not doing it so well on, is policy framework and policy certainty. And we haven't seen that certainty. Like, Canada is ping-ponging along, like the industry right now is not sure whether they're going to start shutting down, or banks are going to de-risk them because they're just involved in the crypto industry, right? Certainty is fundamental, because if I don't know if I'm operating in this jurisdiction and they're going to shut me down tomorrow, why would I even go there, right? So that's huge. And for a while, Canada was a leader in that, and not so much now. And the US was, we kind of leapfrog each other occasionally, and you guys are currently really winning on the attraction of miners. But the ETF, we got you there. But it's other things too. It's like, creating R&D kind of supports, and there's been a lot of complaints about intellectual property laws and patents. So there's just so many things that a government can do. And then, most importantly, like, workers. We need the, knowledge-based economy workers. Like, this is something that takes a while to develop, as in school curriculum, right? For now, it's, industry is scaling up that, but it'd be great if this could be taught at a kind of younger age and be put into the curriculum. And for the last thing, I think, like, to really truly support a domestic Bitcoin strategy, I think you're looking at a treasury allocation, right? Like, what better way to support that? I used to laugh and say maybe it's possible for Canada to have one. We don't have gold anymore, but we do have a strategic maple syrup reserve. Like, can you believe we have more maple syrup than we have gold or Bitcoin?
I love that.
But I digress.
Well, if I was going to summarize it for a person who's maybe in politics or looking to create policy in any jurisdiction, I think your message is really kind of loud and clear of A, get out of the way.
Yeah.
B, let people know that you're going to stay out of the way in some type of form that lets people be able to make capital allocation decisions for the cost of infrastructure and hiring people and whatnot that probably don't want to leave whatever jurisdiction they're in. You've got to provide a stable and calm environment that gives them assurances that they can come here and they can stay here and they can act in a manner that they're not going to be disrupted or toyed with while they're there. That's really kind of the impetus of it. And then Bitcoin will naturally create economic incentives just by the sheer nature of what it's doing, for everything to kind of take place on its own. I think that's really kind of what you're getting at with what you're saying.
100%. And it's funny
fascinating.
because, yeah, no, but it's really ironic is I used to actually have my heavy industry stakeholders. That is exactly what the CEOs used to say, get out of our way. Like basically, like, for example, cap and trade, like it wasn't so much that government was putting in a cap and trade system. It was that it was like taking forever to decide on the rules, and the rules would be set up to 2020, but not 2030. They just wanted certainty, because once there is certainty, they can factor it in. You know, they can conduct all the calculations, depreciations, and financial impact. And even, you know, you can buy offsets ahead of time for future vintages. So it's just a matter of create the framework and let us operate, and we will optimize our resources. And if it makes more sense to just shut down our plant and go to another jurisdiction, you know, at least I have the certainty because I'm making a decision on something that's not, you know, like flipping and flopping, right?
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Give me assurances that you'll stay out of the way.
And the US has traditionally been a lot better about that.
All right. So over in Europe right now, they're having, and I think this really has come home with the whole Russia situation and the expectation that their energy costs are going to start going through the roof. I think that now you're seeing this opportunity for people that have very different opinions than the ones we're talking about tonight, kind of standing up and saying, we have got to ban anything that relates to proof of work. We have got to stop this gross use of energy going into these proof of work protocols. And who knows how this is going to be received over there in the EU, but I mean, the article hit today. So I'm kind of curious, you know, we got plenty of listeners over in Europe that listen to this show. What is your recommendation for them, or where do you see this kind of going and playing out based on this situation, which I think is a real big concern for people living in Europe? These energy costs are going to go up. The pain is there, right? And so like that's where they're coming from without really kind of understanding what it is that they're trying to turn off.
It come back to, like, I really feel they are shooting themselves in the foot with this type of policy, because fundamentally they've got an infrastructure problem, and and they need to spend a lot of money on infrastructure. And, you know, there was a time where a number of European countries shut down their nuclear plants. And nuclear, you know, is a base load, and as a single point source, it generates a lot of power compared to something like a natural gas peaker plant or even a coal plant. And so some are going back and actually going to consider building some more, but the fundamental point is there's a lot of money that needs to be spent on infrastructure, and where is that money going to come from? So I come back to, you know, partner with an industry that's basically printing money, but real money, right? That can subsidize not the taxpayers, not the ratepayers, not the private sector, but here's an industry that can create a new type of subsidy if they partner, you know, by creating either a predictable load. So what's really interesting is I'm seeing this with nuclear plants and Oklo in the US, where they're creating small nuclear reactors, building them, you know, they're piloting this, building out a smaller reactor. Maybe, again, it's a little larger in terms of capacity than the city that they're going to be placed in, but that extra load comes in from Bitcoin miners. So again, creating that predictable revenue stream so that you can, you know, put it up against to take that off the infrastructure cost and the operating cost. And same thing with renewables. Similar situation can be made, because like any kind of investment decision comes down to what are the costs, right? And what are the profits? And so that is, you know, Bitcoin mining is creating that profit center. And the other interesting part about Europe is they've been a lot more comfortable with the fourth R, so energy reuse. There was a time, for example, in Canada, where people were really against energy from waste. So, you know, people would actually picket with signs saying, we're not lab rats, like don't burn garbage, because they were concerned about air emissions and other toxins. And whereas Europe was because they have less land for landfills, it's more densely packed. It's more common that you have energy from waste facilities. And so, similar to what I was talking about, if there's already kind of situations where you are taking in a landfill, whether it's tires or whatnot, it's another way to kind of subsidize that energy facility. And so there's a lot of kind of policy issues that can be solved from positive front. But they're stuck on this idea still that we lack energy. It's causing energy prices, and miners are going to steal that energy, so we have to shut them down. And they're not seeing it as kind of this symbiotic, opportunity. And that is something that I think that can only be navigated through, telling these stories and showing these examples of this already happening somewhere else in the world.
Right. So this next one's off topic, but there was a lot of people online that were telling me that I need to ask you about being a volunteer fireman.
Yeah, I know. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I'm a first responder as well. So if you are in a car accident, your car is on fire, I'll put that fire out. I will jaws of life and get you out of there, and administer to any first aid needs. Yes, we also rescue cats, I guess. I haven't had the opportunity to do that, but honestly, I love it. It's interesting because most people don't know 70 to 80% of fire departments in North America are actually volunteer, as in they're not career departments. It's volunteers coming in. So, I'm on call 24/7 if obviously, family and the job comes first. But, especially if there's something like a fire in the community, like once the pager goes off, I'm, in firefighter mode.
I love this.
Yeah, but I think so. It's interesting. A lot of Bitcoiners are actually moving to these rural towns where you're not going to have, a career fire department. I think it's first of all, it's an awesome skill set if you're picking up, first response. It's just like you have a first responder in your house. But secondly, you're building really good, strong relationships with your community. It's really rewarding. It's challenging too. Obviously there's that element, but it's just I love it. It's become part of my identity.
I love it. That is just so cool. Good for you.
Thanks. It's really funny because we talk about what is Bitcoin. It's it's fire insurance, right? We know as firefighters, the importance of having fire insurance, and Bitcoin's kind of it's like buying fire insurance, but it's also like building another house in another town, and it's another total local economy.
I absolutely love it. Mags, I don't have anything else. If you if you'd like, can you give a handoff to folks where they can find you? I know you're active on Twitter, and then also a Cold Card as well, which we were talking with MVK last week. So feel free to give some handoffs to anything you'd like. Yep,
I'm crypto_mags on Twitter. So I'm Vice President of Business Development at CoinKite. We make awesome products like this calculator, the Open Dime, which is basically like I'm handing you gold. It's and we've got really cool products coming, like the Tap Signer and the Sats card, but those you can find out from last week's podcast with Rodolfo. It's funny because I keep straddling, Bitcoin is so digital that I keep finding these jobs where I'm straddling this physical and digital world. Wonderful. But it's exciting. It's the base level, exciting. Right?
Yes, very exciting. Well, we can't thank you enough for making time and coming on the show. It's just an absolute pleasure to talk with you and to hear your point of view.
Thank you. You're one of my favorite podcasts, so I know it takes work. So I appreciate you finding and creating good content.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next podcast episode and new investing resources.
What are your takeaways and thoughts on this discussion? Let us know in the comments section below.